Warm greetings. Welcome to Wednesdays for Water. We are a citizens collective aiming to walk and talk water. We try to meet every week and connect people with various water worries and wisdoms. And in the process, we wish to curate future water warriors. The way we talk about trivial things for hours, water too needs walking and talking to address the rising water distresses. The way Wednesdays for Water is conceptualized as a prime time show, it wishes to make water everybody's business. The idea of the series was conceptualized in August 2020, and by the end of the year, the team and the structure was pretty much in shape. We started in April 2021 with Dr. Rajendra Singh's inaugural speech. We wish to bring science and society together, and therefore we try to bring in every session either a policymaker or practitioner and a researcher or academician. We also think that future generation is crucial and therefore they have presence in each session. We are going stronger with every week now with session on either quiz, couple of weeks of hard talks, and a week of soft session of art and music. There is a simple structure for each session of quiz, hard session, and soft session, which are moderated by the core team member. Here is a glimpse of what we call as hard sessions and soft sessions. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Wednesdays for Water team, we welcome you to the one more session of Wednesdays for Water. As you may be aware that it was instituted last year, so we are inching towards a year, with the objective to engage in conversation with water experts, grassroots practitioners, policy makers, thinkers, and youth to explore these complex intertwined issues around water and explore possible solutions. Yeah, in this March, we celebrate World Women's Day and observe the World Water Day. And in between these two major events, we have organized two sessions, today and the 16th March as Women in Water. And today we are going to have the part one to acknowledge and appreciate the contribution of women in water conservation and management. The foundation of these two sessions are laid on the fact that water is life and water and women are synonymous. A society's status can be assessed pretty much with the condition of water and women. Like life of water is not linear, it is complex braided ecosystem that has the ability to self-rejuvenate. So there are two important aspects basically we are talking about, and this is how the two sessions are laid out. One thing is managing the resource, the other thing is managing the knowledge of the resource. Since the inception of Wednesdays for Water, we are trying to bridge this knowledge between the science and society, because the proponents of action are often undermining the value of science. And at the same time, the complex water science is often struggling to connect with the societal aspects in a simple ways. And because of this, we find that Water Museum is one of the ways where we can bring the hard science into the public forum in a simpler manner, where it is more interacting. And we can also reinforce the need for a platform where science is basically reaching out to society through these communications, and Water Museum becomes that channel so that people can comprehend and appreciate the complexities of the water systems, and as well as get motivated to join in the collective efforts towards its conservation and management. Remember, we have been talking about it, that water management is people management. So in the next session, we are actually going to talk about more water justice from the ground, but today we are talking about the water knowledge management. You will be pleased to learn actually Water Museum is a well-established movement across the world, and surprisingly, many water experts are not even aware of it. And that's why we thought it is very important to bring this idea to all of us. So we actually have virtual water museums and physical water museums around the world. And there are many examples, you can always look at it, but I will leave that to my speakers to talk about it, as we have two wonderful speakers, Professor Sarah Ahmad and Farah Kabir from India and Bangladesh respectively. And it's great to learn from both the countries because both of them are actually on the path of making Water Museum a reality. Today, Sara will highlight on the virtual museum and the world museum movements, since she brought this concept to India, and it's now well placed in Indian society now that we need water museums in all states. as well as a national museum, both in the virtual and the physical way. So Sara has already curated number of city level museums like Mumbai narratives, right now going on the Pune narratives, and she's working on other narratives which she's going to talk about. So with a brief introduction of Sara, now I will invite Sara. Sara is the founder of the Living Waters Museum. I'm saying Sara because she's a close friend actually. So Dr. Sarah Ahmad is the founder of Living Waters Museum, a virtual repository visualizing the narratives of water heritage and seeking to engage with the youth as future water keepers through digital tools, music, arts, interaction. She is currently adjunct professor at the Indian Institute of Science and Education and Research Pune, which is IISER Pune, where she is helping to develop the Center for Water Research, drawing her 30 years of applied research on water, livelihoods, and social equity. She has a long list of accomplishments and engagement with the society. We will put the detailed bio in the chat box. And with this brief introduction, I would like to invite Sara to really enlighten us with the way India is really heading towards making its water museum a reality. So welcome again, Sara, and the rest of the speakers I'm going to invite when their turn will come. And sorry, I forgot to mention that we also have Chhavi Mathur as our discussant. We all know the role of discussant will be to really ask difficult questions to the speakers. I will introduce Chhavi also later on. So welcome, Sara, and please take the responsibility of talking further from here. I'm going to stop screen sharing. And thank you very much, all the speakers.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mansee. And I'm just going to be sharing my screen. Okay, I think you can all see that.
Yes, we see. Yes, confirmed.
So, great. You can see that as well, right? Because now I can't see myself.
Okay, we see the screen.
Yeah. So Mansee's already given you a little bit of an overview of what the water museums are. We're part of a global network of water museums that was launched in Venice in 2017. And I have been one of the founders of that network. It's a little confusing for people in India to try and understand what a water museum is, and it really means many things. It can be a physical museum around ancient water technologies. It can be an open air museum around wetlands. It can be museums that tell the stories of, floods and climate change. But the real purpose of water museums is to work with young people to rethink what water means for all of us. And as a global network, we were recognized by UNESCO's Intergovernmental Hydrology Program in 2018 as a special initiative to address SDG 6 on access to water and sanitation. And I think this special initiative has now spread and increased, and there are many, many more water museums coming into the network from as far apart as, from China to Ecuador to from Italy to Morocco. So spanning the globe, more or less. And people are really beginning to look at what this water heritage means for all of us and what can we learn from this past. So in that spirit, and given my years of work in the water sector, I felt that we weren't doing enough to link different means of communication, using art, using storytelling, using virtual media, etc. And that's how we started Living Waters in 2017 as well. And for the first 3 years, we were at Ahmedabad University, which is where I met Mansee. And we were able to also, in addition to, working on the website and all, we were also able to curate a number of physical experiences around stepwells, in cafes, around the Sabarmati, and so on, I'll show you some slides on some of those things, but basically we work with schools, academic institutes, a range of NGOs, and it's very, very collaborative, the work. It's a process approach, thinking about water from this interdisciplinary lens. And at the end of the day, asking ourselves, how far can museums motivate or facilitate social and behavioral change? And I think if we were to measure impact, that is what I would like to look at one of these days. I'm just going to move a little bit because it's suddenly become very humid and hot in Pune, as if it's going to be a storm. So I need to get under a fan. Just a second. Just keep it going. So yeah, these are just going to be, I'm going to run through this very quickly. I'm not giving you a lecture, but it's just to try and understand what we're doing as a museum. And I'm sure someone's put the link up on the chat box, but we've tried to do a map that shows stepwells and the stories around stepwells, and that's also on our website. We've worked with students from NID, and this was a very interesting immersive experience that a student of exhibition design worked on. A lot of people don't even know that there's a stepwell in their backyard. They don't know the importance of stepwells and why and how they were built by patrons, right from the early 14th century onwards. Gujarat, Rajasthan, and even in South India, they're not called stepwells. There are many, many names for these wells. But in this story, it's an interactive story where this little girl in a futuristic world searching for water falls down one of these wells, and how she then has to find her way out. And you can see in the picture above, the taps are actually inverted. So they're sucking water up from the aquifers to support urbanization and development and so on. And this girl's task, in order to find her way out of the well, is to close these taps. And she does that with the help of oracles. So that's the story, but it brings many things into the picture. We've worked on the Sabarmati. We've had archival work, and NID students again are putting together an archive of images on the Sabarmati right from the 1940s onwards, whatever we could find. And we made a short film as well, because as everyone knows, and particularly in Pune, where there's a lot of conversation around the proposed riverfront development that's being planned for Pune, along what happened to the Sabarmati in Ahmedabad, and the relocation of 35,000 artisans, people who sought a livelihood from this river and so forth. And, the kind of riverfront that came up is questionable. I won't go into all of that right now. That's a separate topic, which I talked about yesterday, but just to show you that this is some of the stories we're doing. One of our first projects was actually a physical exhibition with a very interesting museum, a private museum of utensils. And many of these are water utensils dating to about 100 years ago. And these utensils tell stories, and many of them are still being used. And they also tell us stories about women and men and their relationship with water. So women fetching water using, the kada on the head and so on, and men traveling with the mashk, filling water and moving on a journey, So those kind of things that you can find from these inanimate objects. And that's what we captured in the stories, which you see on the top picture, but it's also on our website. And the stories are both in English and in Gujarati. So every time we do an exhibition, we make sure that the content is available in the local language as well. Women, Water and Work, we did this in 2019. Again, this was a global call, but most of the images we got were from India. And I think since yesterday was Women's Day, every day is Women's Day, but we need to also really try and understand women's domestic roles, productive roles, and their community engagement around water governance. So this is also, I would encourage you to see this exhibition online. It has many, many things, many people, many women actually sent us poems along with their photographs or their artwork as well. And what these poems reflected was their feelings around water. whilst we were at the university, and I keep saying this, that even as a virtual museum, we are more than a website. That is really, really important to keep in mind. I mean, there are a lot of things you can do in the virtual world or the online world, but unless you really interact with people and have these conversations, you're not going to be serving the purpose of what a museum is in terms of engagement and outreach. Also with children around water heritage sites, we were able to work with our students at the university, take them to step wells, take them to places like Sarkej Rosa, talk about these water histories using storytellers and other people as well, and also reaching out to children with special needs. This is work that we did in the Northeast. This was one of our very small grants from the British Council. Again, here, working during the pandemic from 2020 to early 21, working with young girls from 30 indigenous communities, talking about their relationship with water, their stories from their ancestors, from their grandparents. And the whole purpose of this project was to capture this history, because, you know, the Northeast, most of it is all or oral histories. And the idea was to capture it before we lost more people to the pandemic, to COVID. And so this was what we did. There was a really interesting workshop with young girls and giving them voice, allowing them to express themselves through music, through videos, through poetry, through their art, you know, that they weave a lot in the Northeast, and each woven piece tells a story. So the girls produced this amazing work, and that's also visualized, and it's also on the LWM portal. Also during the pandemic, we started our work around urban waterscapes. So Confluence was the work we did in Mumbai, which we launched exactly 1 year ago, bringing together a huge number of urban designers, researchers, water professionals, etc. Mind you, these were people we hadn't met at all. We just built, and I think that's very important to remember, building relationships of trust at a time when you're working in this virtual world, and just the same way that, you know, Wednesdays for Water has been able to do that. So I'm not going to go into all this exhibition. Again, it's all over there, but again, using different media, using interactive media to bring to life things like Mumbai's coastline and all the shore animals that live there. And so each of these things is a dot. And if you click on it, a little pop-up window will come up which will tell you. And it's amazing, you know, even I, who come from there, don't know that there's so many creatures that actually just live below our feet. One of the galleries, so there are 6 galleries in Confluence, and one of them is on equity and access to water. We worked with the Pani Hak Samiti, which has had a long struggle to fight for water as a basic human right for many of the migrant communities. And you know that many of them, because they don't own the land, they don't have access to water as well. Often they don't have what I would call regularized access to water. And then in this story, the Mahad Satyagraha, this is Ambedkar, and this was a big struggle as well in the 1940s. So that was done through a graphic novel. Using the same approach to understanding urban waterscapes, we are now working in Calcutta, documenting the ghats over there, working with architectural students, working with schools, and also with ECOMOS eventually. But we've also got a small grant in Calcutta to do a project on climate change in the Sundarbans. It's called Project Climate Wall. And the purpose is to build a physical wall with mangrove species that local communities choose that they want, and also a virtual wall with sayings and poems and what children feel about climate change and what role they want to take. So I think we've got a song out already. Unfortunately, I don't have the YouTube link over here for that song, but there's also a rap that the children are putting together. And the first meeting, the launch of that project also had children from Bangladesh involved as well. So very interesting project, and it's just started. And similarly in Pune, the work that Chhavi leads on coordinating Pune's water stories. We're launching this exhibition on the 28th of March, Punyache Pani. And this talks about Pune's water challenges, Pune's very distinct water histories, from the stored waters, from the kind of stepped wells that Pune had, to the aqueduct system built by the Peshwas, to the pipelines, to the kind of sanitary measures that the British government brought in, and then what happened in post-independent India, and then some of the challenges that the city faces now around its waters. So this exhibition will be launched the exhibition will be virtual, but it will be launched with a series of physical events, panels and talks, and a cultural program around water and the arts as well for a whole week. So inviting those of you in Pune to please join us for this. And finally, another urban landscape that we're working is in Jodhpur with the Mehranger Museum Trust to explore Jodhpur and basically Rajasthan's also rich water history, from its patrons and rulers and all, to the everyday practices around water in an urban landscape. And I think in this endeavor, we are co-curating this with the museum there at the fort. But we had a very interesting workshop in December where a number of people came, and I think it was the first time that there were these I wouldn't even call them interdisciplinary dialogues, but talking about water from a cultural lens, talking about water from a design lens and from an art and an architectural lens, and of course the history of the amazing water structures that Jodhpur has. So I just wanted to give you a glimpse of our work as a water museum, as a virtual museum, very engaged, very embedded, and definitely collaborative in what we do and how we work around India, and also the time and effort that I put into the global network. So I'll stop there. Mansee, you're muted.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much for this brief, because I know in 15 minutes everything cannot be told. But the information which Sarah was sharing is all available in the digital platform. And you can just go on diving that, like that little girl which she was showing in her image. So thank you once again. And a very important point which she brought out, and which also demystifies the very idea of museum itself, because the way we perceive museum as a place to house only past and some dead objects, where you go and see them and either you put some pity or empathy on them and you come back. You remember a few things and you lose few things. But the way they are curating in the Living Water Museum is more of engagement. And this is something which was also very interesting. And in her objective, as she rightly pointed out, collaboration, curation, communication. And let me also tell you, Mahat Satyagraha is one of the first Jal Satyagraha in the country. And we also have a postal stamp on that. So yes, it's a very, very important event for all those who work on water governance, and particularly on the Satyagraha side of it. So it's good to learn these aspects, and we can move on to the next point of talking about some physical doing, which you also laid a stress upon, that this water museum approach is not just doing something on virtual, but the three clear points. First, collaboration. So basically collective action on the ground, then curation, and then communication to the rest of the world. So you showed it very simply how it is done and how you are going ahead. And I'm very excited to tell that based on this, actually we presented it to Ahmedabad, Sara and me, to the local authorities in Ahmedabad, that we can put up a physical museum. And very similarly, we are trying to convince people in Pondicherry. I assume people from Pondicherry have also joined here. Maybe they will ask some questions later. So as we are talking about this, bridging this virtual water museum and physical water museum, because Government of India has also approved physical water museum for every state. We have some museum already coming up in some states, like Udaipur is building up one, Kerala is building up one, so one in Rajasthan. So we still need to see how they will take shape. But I would like to invite Farah at this point to throw a light on the details of how life revolves around, to highlight the apathy of the people, and how even such kind of events and even projects can even empower people to talk around, So we know that Bangladesh already has a water museum now, and now I'm talking about the physical. So just quick background of Farah. So Farah Kabir is working with Action Aid Bangladesh as a country director since June 2007. With over 3 decades of vast experience in the field of development and research, she has actually made her name in the human rights section more, but I will say that she is also working on human rights, water, ecology, and it's all coming together, and when she's talking about human rights, she's also talking about other beings' right as well. So rest of the bios we are going to put there to save time and hear from Farah. So over to you, Farah. We are very keen to hear what is going on there and how can we co-learn and take it further from here. Thank you, Farah.
Thank you, Mansee, and I feel privileged to be here and joining the Wednesday for Water. Listening to Sarah, my journey around the museum or water museum is very different, because it was as a result of our development work and how the communities were getting infected. So before I continue, would you mind sharing the PowerPoint so that I can give a little bit of context of Bangladesh? And climate change, disasters, all this was very intense and getting even more extreme when I joined Action Aid, and from 2007 I could see that our development initiatives were threatened, were at high risk because of climate change. And there's also the aspect of policymakers, decision makers, making water, river is an issue which the common person doesn't understand. So our approach was to try and look at how water impacts the lives of the people, all of us, and also try and demystify. So the next slide, please. I just want to give a context that, the ground reality for Bangladesh is that it's predominantly a riverine country. Some 800 rivers flow and there are tributaries to it. And we share rivers with Bhutan, China, India, Myanmar, Nepal, all these neighboring countries. About 23 or 25% of the GDP contribution is from agriculture. And surface water comes from these transboundary rivers for irrigation. So the life of people depend on agriculture, which is governed very much by rivers, as well as by, of course, the weather and other issues. Next. So this is Bangladesh, and this is our ground realities. And the challenges that we identified working with communities were the barrages and river linking projects have disrupted the flow of river. They've actually tried to govern and manage river, which has caused a lot of disruption. Low or extremely high influx of sediment, which we welcome, but it is affecting the ecology. Dependence on groundwater for irrigation, industries growing, and with industrialization and the infrastructure-based development model, it's threatening the water. And Sundarban forests are being threatened due to salinity and lack of sediment. So this is our challenges and the impact. Next. Were that groundwater level and deep aquifer reserves are depleting, rivers were drying up, agriculture, fisheries, ecology, human health, hugely affected, temperature balance, rainfall, erosion, vegetation were being impacted critically, cost of agriculture was rising, and water resource management was proving to be difficult, and there weren't any solution. Now, why did, next, please. So all our development work led us to some kind of campaign where we were trying to work in South Asia and talk about commons, water as a common resource. And we tried to talk to our South Asian colleagues, and we found that there were a lot of difficulties because there was political issues, the geopolitics of it, there was the bureaucracy of it, there was water sharing issues, and the common person who was getting affected didn't understand and was trying to understand why our policymakers were not taking up the issues, why we could not take it up and solve these problems. So all this led to this, the thinking that, okay, now how about bringing the water and related issues to the people through a museum. And that is how the Water Museum in Pakimara, Kwakata started to shape up. And you know, we built this museum in exactly 28 days. We were very fortunate to find an architect who did pro bono work, and we all went out and collected waters. You can see all the bottles. Those are the water from 57 of the transboundary rivers. Next slide. And the concerns, you know, we wanted to build this water museum so that it did not remain with the, you know, help the people to understand the political boundaries, uphold that, and reimagine river in a human and ecological way. Talk about sharing and river and its waters, if that's possible, because we think we can control river, and I think that's where the problem is. And then the multi-country water commons campaign, regional campaign, and we were trying to find solutions because we realized through all our work that people, indigenous knowledge, come up with the solutions, and those are more effective than working or depending on experts only. Next. So we built the Water Museum. That is what it looks like. This is the first ever water museum physical in Asia. It was built in 2014. The aim was to create a sense of awareness among the stakeholders, especially the policymakers, and also to create a strong basis for policy advocacy on water commons. So when the people understand, they can then ask their representatives, they can hold their elected representatives accountable. The way we set it up was, this structure is on a piece of land that is owned by the farmers. Again, another project of ActionAid, which is the Farmers Federation. And they gave us the space to build the Water Museum. And so it has got two CBOs, local NGO and ActionAid, together running the museum. Next slide. And as I was saying, that our architect, he volunteered and he designed it. So there's a boat outside, and then there's on the first floor, there's the museum with water from our transboundary rivers, which is with Nepal, Myanmar, India. Visuals on river systems occupy the space in the museum. There are artifacts which are part of our cultural heritage and symbolic, you know, like life-size boats stuck on a dried-up riverbed. When you enter the museum, that's what you get to see. There are models of local river system and flora and fauna. And you know, the model was made by a group of women who are not architects. They are not graphic designers. They are not carpenters, but they wanted to make this model. And that model populates our museum. And then we started organizing, you know, bringing out publications. We were doing events around the Water Museum. Next. And we created videos. So if you go to YouTube, I'm not going to show you the video now because of time. Next. But please do watch a video on the Water Museum. Next. And then, you know, this space started to host the artifacts, the products, and it is being curated. This museum is not in the capital. It's not in a city. It's way out there where the coastal people live, where the fishermen live, where the community is. And it's curated by a woman. This was like breaking all barriers. There was no concept of a common person being a curator, B, that to a woman. So this was like we were pushing and challenging every existing norm. And around the museum, we have been, sorry? No, around the museum, we started organizing children's events, school, we brought in school children, and they started learning about the rivers, the ecosystem, the sediment, and the transboundary rivers. Next. Can we, yeah. So, and we can, these are some photographs of the museum. Please go on. Quick, yeah. There was a conference, and we've had till now 7 water conferences, which highlighted all the different issues of water and river, the rights of the river. And interestingly, as we were doing this campaign on the rights of the rivers, the Bangladesh River Commission took this issue up. It's called Pani Jadugor, because it's people's, and people wanted to talk about, Jadu magic, but this is living magic. And the campaign led to the establishment of river as an entity, as having a right, and it's for all rivers in the country. This is an amazing, groundbreaking legislation that has come as a result of these years of advocacy and lobbying with other environmental groups, with other rights-based groups. Next. Yeah, so I think this is the case study, which is there on the video. And we organize, yes, next one. We organize water walks to raise awareness. And then next. And then the Kwakata Declaration. This was the first conference, and this declaration was the basis on which we took up our active action and went on campaigning and doing advocacy. Next, we have publications also. So the conferences, the 7 conferences, these are the conferences. It was about rights of water and defending commons, water democracy, water roots innovation, river as a living entity, as a being. And in 2019, the High Court declared this. So this is amazing, legalizing the river rights. And then water, climate, and justice. And these are the different conferences we had. Next. So far, over 2,000 people, including government officials and students, have visited. They have looked at the artifacts, the stories, the different pieces that we have there. There's photography, and it's a way of raising awareness on these issues without being highly, technical, or without making it too political. But people are now understanding what it means, what this water sharing is, why we are having these difficulties, or what can be done. Next. These are the 2 publications. These are, one was the micro narratives. We listened to the people living around water and rivers and their quest for water commons. And then we brought out this book, People of Many Rivers and the Rights Rivers and the Quest for Water Commons. These are our 2 publications so far. Next. So, and then we joined the Global Water Museum movement, and we are also a part of this movement. And I hope that, through our engagement and interactions, we can all, you can also join us in spreading the Water Museum idea. We also have organized cultural events around it. So the next slide will show you, probably give you the links to our cultural events. There is the music, the song that was recorded, then there was dance that was, is there, the program we had, and then we had concert by Jalil Khan, so that younger people could also join us and be interested. So we've had different kinds of cultural activities as well. So our approach to the whole water museum was based on trying to demystify, bring in the voices of the common person, of the people living with water, the people on the ground, the women on the ground, and trying to help the next generation, the younger people, understand and take on leadership, do the campaigns that are required, also hold our stakeholders, our politicians and bureaucrats accountable. Yeah, so I think I've got a couple more slides. These are just part of the cultural program. We had a very well-known dancer who's a researcher and an activist. She did a presentation of rafts, rivers, and mutual performance. We invited Farida Parveen, who's a mystic poet and a lalon singer. She was a part of our event. She has a very famous saying, "E Poddai Meghna." So that was performed. And in the 7th Water Conference, which took place in January of 2022, we had local and folk songs. So we want to bring the cultural part into our conference and other activities as well. And I hope that as we organize the 8th conference, January of 2023, that you will be able to join us virtually or physically. So I'll leave it at that and I'll take questions. Okay, Mansee?
Thank you, Farah. Thank you so much for taking us through, because you also further demystify that Water Museum is also a people museum. So it's not something fancy done at a very high cost and then people are really finding difficult, and it's not exclusionary, but it is extraordinary. Two important things: that the first physical water museum in Asia, and also curated by women. What a good day to celebrate it around Women's Day. Huh? So this is very, very amazing for us. And as I mentioned, that India is also now set, in fact, it's already 2 years, 3 years that government has declared physical water museum to be part of every state. Might as well we also learn how Bangladesh did it as, people's museum, and not really doing it the other way around, putting a lot of money and then people are not going there. Because museum is not something where people are not interacting, which you are very much showing that it is for everyday life. People can build it by themselves, people can really work around it, people can make voice about it, and people can hold accountable their own leaders. That is an important part here. I think this is a very, very important aspect. What is the role of a museum? We need to discuss, further, because it's not only hosting few artifacts here and there, but I think what museums can do, I will bring our discussant on board here to represent all the participants here with her questions and where can we head forward, and especially learning from both virtual museum and physical museum. We also learn we need to find out a way how convergence is possible, and how they can complement each other and strengthen the very idea of water museum. If we want to manage water, the knowledge has to be managed first. So I now invite Chhavi Mathur, who is our discussant from Living Waters Museum, part of Sarah's team, to represent us. And Chhavi has her PhD from Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, in biochemistry. She's worked for 5 years in the National Institute of Health in Bethesda, USA, and as a visiting scientist at Universidad de Chile in and Marine Biology Laboratory in also Woods Hole, USA. I will leave the rest of the bio in the chat box, but I'm very excited to have a young discussant. As you all know, the Wednesdays for Water is designed around the discussant, so we look forward to Chhavi interacting with both the speakers. Over to you, Chhavi.
Thank you, Mansee, and hi, Sara, and hi, Farah. And it's such a privilege to be here and to be talking about water museums and the women in water on just next to the International Women's Day. So, like you mentioned, the last thing you mentioned was that I was working in marine biology lab, and what brought me to museums was my curiosity to understand this, how to bridge the discourse between science and society, and water right there takes a highlight if you look at it, one of the highlights. So I think I would start this discussion from the place of curiosity. And I would like to ask both our speakers today as to what in their journey with water as women motivated them to explore museums. So either of you.
Sarah, why don't you start?
One by one.
Okay, Sarah, thank you. Chhavi, because I live in a riverine country, so I've always seen water around us. But what was very clear that not all water was for us, and also the difficulty of accessing water. And then with the corporatization, the affordability of water. So this, and I would say one of my breaking points was after Cyclone Sidor, I went to Sundarbans. I was working with the community in the far areas, difficult to reach. And women, they had lost everything. And then they were trying to take care of the children, and they would walk for miles and get one bottle of water and bring it and give it to the children, while they themselves were drinking the most polluted water and getting diarrhea and so on. So water, traveling around the country, that was one of the things that I found, that in the chores, in areas, there's flooding, there's water, but this is not safe water. And then how women are responsible for finding it. So this was on the ground. And then at the other level was that this whole discourse around water, water sharing, the politics, the geopolitics of it, it was not helping. It was not solving the problems. And in when we took up the initiative of Water Commons from 2009, I have to say this, that many of my colleagues or many of my friends were again coming at this water from a very nationalistic, patriarchal perspective. It was very difficult to move out of that nationalistic thinking, the chauvinistic thinking, and say, no, people don't have access to it. It is not a common. It is not. And then there was the engineers and solutions coming from them, which was based on infrastructure and dam. So my journey started from all those angles. I'm absolutely not an expert on any of these areas. All I had was curiosity and passion.
Sarah?
Thank you, Farah. Sarah?
Yeah, so for me, it was really with my PhD research on the cleaning of the Ganga in Benares, in Varanasi, way back in the late 1980s, that I got passionate about the relationship between water and culture and people and livelihoods, and how efforts to clean rivers and now efforts to link rivers and so on, how they intersect with people's lives. And also for me, it was the symbolism around water that is so very sacred and so very important in all our faiths, that water is a connector. Yes, there is conflict and competition over water, but water is also a means of peace building, bridging faiths, bridging different perspectives, bridging cultures, and so on. So for me, the conversation, and you were asking about what took us to the Water Museum, well, after Mansee already mentioned years of work in water as a professor, as a researcher, as a development funder, etc. I came across art and artists working around water, addressing issues of climate change, scarcity, working with indigenous communities. Amazing stuff that was being done on water, whether it was in America or Canada or Australia or Africa. And really this big gap in India or South Asia, or before I knew of Farah's work with the museum. And I think that's what inspired me, that why don't we have a water museum in India? And the idea initially was to build it in a stepwell. That, of course, requires all kinds of resources. And then you think about a stepwell is open. How do you lock it up? You know, there are all these kind of questions that go into your head. And then you actually start thinking about, well, where's the content? Where are the stories? How do I build it? So from us, it was the idea, that was how we started, you know, to build this as a virtual repository, and then to have it as a hub where then we can connect to different landscapes, urban or rural, and think about more local, more contextually embedded water museums. And that conversation with Mansee in Pondicherry, that conversation with the Aga Khan Rural Service Program in Gujarat, to think of a museum in their rain center in Sila, to expand on that. That conversation with the government of India to think of a museum for the Ganga way back in 2018. And then in 2019, a national water museum for India. I was part of all these workshops and conversations, and then along came the pandemic and funds froze. So we are now working on a virtual museum on water for children, with the Jal Jeevan Mission is doing, and that is going to be linked to the curriculum. So I'm very much a part of that process. But for me, having Living Waters Museum at an academic institution is also important. How do we work with students? How do we work with young people? How do we work particularly in mainstream places like IISERs or IIMs or IITs, or even design and architecture schools? Mansee, you were talking about that the other day, to get them to think about water, not just about space and structures and angles and geomorphologies, but to think about people's relationship with water, something they struggle for, something they drink, something they worship or worship with. So the various, in our Pune work, Chhavi, the stories that we have from the pastoral communities, the deities, and their whole transhuman story is linked to water. So much of this cultural aspects of water doesn't really come out in mainstream education on water, and that was the purpose of Living Waters. Both the gender aspects, I'm not talking about my work on gender and water, but I think for me, it's much bigger than just gender. It's a bigger cultural issue and significant right now, given the kind of world we're seeing around us.
Thanks, Sarah. So I think both of you at some point in time touched about the issue of health. So I would like to know, through your museums, how are you exploring water with health, and especially women's health?
May I just add a line here with the Chhavi, that how can we use museum as a tool to strengthen this aspect also? So thank you, Chhavi.
Thanks for adding that, I think. Yeah.
So I think the relationship between water and health was so explicit during this 2 years of the COVID pandemic. And everyone was talking about hand washing and sanitizing and everything else. And then you find out that a lot of public health engineering doesn't really talk about wash. So I was saying, so in our work in Mumbai and our work in Pune, which you have also led, Chhavi, we have been tracing this history of public health in India and how we dealt with things like the Spanish flu, the plague, the Spanish flu, epidemics and pandemics in the past, what kind of sanitary measures were there, etc. And I think it's really interesting to see that history and to see that what the government of India did in 2020 in terms of lockdowns or quarantines or all this that everyone was aghast about was not actually new. It has happened 50 years ago or 100 years ago. So there's a lot to learn from that public health history of India, and we need to bring it out. Something else we did in Confluence was create a GIS map that shows where the COVID hotspots intersected with water hotspots. And of course, those were all in the poorer slums and communities. I don't like the word slums, but poorer communities living in Mumbai. So that was very, very clear from that GIS map that is where it was all happening. And we knew that, So I think that is there. In terms of health and women's health, I think for me, a lot of that work, when I've taught in the water studio at Ahmedabad University, getting young people to think about menstrual hygiene and what that means for girls. And, during the pandemic, my students did a whole campaign. There were all this relief funding that NGOs were giving to migrant workers and all, but no one was thinking about women's health and women's menstrual health in that whole thing. So our students organized around that, and they, took up campaigning around that. And that was because we touched upon these things in the water course. And then since I work with NGOs in India, like WaterAid, like Wetlands International, there's a lot of work that obviously they are doing on public health. And even many of our NGO partners in Ahmedabad are working on this issue. So we help them that way.
My entry or my understanding of water and health is from a practical side of working with the community. But what was what kind of shook me was, there was in 1988 there was severe floods in Bangladesh, and we were, of course, humanitarian response, and everything we did was food, water, and trying to support them. But then it affects. There's a gender dimension to it, a very strong gender dimension in terms of the impact of any kind of disaster. And what was the finding? That women would wait the whole day and not drink water because there was water logging, there was flooding, and then they would only go to the toilet after dark because of, privacy or access and so on. And the rate of UTI just escalated. And that's how one realized, oh my God, this is what is happening. And then one looked around school, remembered experiences from university where girls refused to go to the toilet, or if they went on travels, they would not drink water, So that aspect of health and water was becoming very clear in my mind. And then as I started working as a development practitioner, as a rights person, I made that connection. And I just shared the story with you about working after CEDAW. And so the campaign for making water accessible was very important. And I remember that, again, from one of the cyclones, we helped to rebuild or build new shelters. And then when we installed the tube well, the women in the community, they came and hugged me as if I had done something. I said, no, they said, no, you don't realize the shelters are fine. But by giving us this water point, what you have done is now our children will not have stomach-related health issues. And not only that, the women from nearby villages were also coming to get water. So it would save them in terms of the water collection exercise, the time taken, health related. So this is how I learned about that aspect. And then I traveled across the country. Believe me, there were no toilets. So one of the campaigns was that please install campaigns along the roads. And we once had a president who put these toilets in the gas stations. But even now, I live in a capital city, and often a lot of people we know are struggling to find a place to access the facility. And if you can't access the facility, UTI is one of your biggest problems. And then there are so many other problems. So that's how I made that connection. It's not through the museum, but the years of working in this area.
Chhavi, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So what I realized from both of your talks and the discussion is that the museums are providing not just awareness, but providing these spaces for shared voices to be spoken and to be heard, and it is providing the indigenous, it's providing the indigenous knowledge, making it more available, and allowing people to probably ask for solutions, reimagine solutions. In what ways do students, when you interact with students, are these issues, in what ways do they get communicated to them, and how do students respond to interactions with the museums?
This is Sarah's forte.
Unmute. Farah, you also showed us slides where there were children involved as well. But I guess for us, what we do with Living Waters Museum is that we give young people, I would say more than the children, but young people in universities or colleges, an opportunity to explore something in water. We did this we started in 2020 with something called the Water Seekers Fellowships, which we ran in partnership with the Social and Political Research Foundation, a Delhi-based NGO. And that year, I think we had, because everyone was locked up that year, we had some 145 applications for 5 fellowships, for 5 grants. And these were very small grants. And they enabled young people to look at indigenous technologies around water. So we had a story on the Ahir pines in Bihar for irrigation, a kund next to Delhi, and I'm just forgetting now. Oh yes, we had something from on the Parsi wells in Bombay. Very interesting practices by the Zoroastrian community there around their sacred wells and their sacred waters. So that, and another story from Rajasthan exploring pots and how these cluster of pots and how people were still storing water and using pots in Matka. So these students did what they could in terms of, being locked up and being able to travel and using other means of developing visual stories and developing policy briefs. Last year in 21, we focused on urban waterscapes. Again, we had more like some 250 applications for 6 fellowships. Again, very small grants. But again, young people exploring absolutely amazing things, from sewage and sanitation dump on the outskirts of Delhi, to looking at the relationship between the transgender community and WASH, to looking at the kulams in South India, in Tamil Nadu, and how that whole cascading system of lakes and water structures and all works. And then to the Hooghly in Calcutta and the Adiganganga over there. So I'm very impressed with the way that young people want to explore, the way, I think at the heart of the work we do, and maybe Chhavi, you would agree with this, is very, very strong mentoring. I think this whole mentoring business, helping people develop content, develop a story, develop an idea which they have thought of and they want to work on, this is really critical to how we as Living Waters Museum work, because ultimately it's that content that builds the website for us, builds our repository. And that has to be vetted and peer reviewed and mentored. So that's one thing. And I think now, like the grant that you have, Transforming Education for Sustainable Futures, bringing science students from IISER into writing pedagogy and content for children on water, like what we're calling the water classrooms. I think that's a fantastic example of how young people are facilitating education and peer-to-peer learning also in the process. So I think those are important things. In a physical museum, you can do a lot more with technologies and demonstrations and all. We are fortunate that IISER has something called the Science Activity Center, where we can run experiments, do capacity building, work with teachers to facilitate this kind of interactive pedagogy, because that is so badly needed in India, right? How do you teach teachers to teach? I mean, how do you learn? And that process of learning is the process of unlearning, So working and bringing that and talking about water, not just from bricks and bones and structures and, aquifers and so on, but really this people's connection with water and understanding these hierarchies and inequalities. I think for young people, that is what Living Waters Museum does, that whole demystification of water,
Thank you. Chhavi, would you like to ask more questions, or we can open to the people around?
I think I would like to ask one question to Farah.
Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead.
So I was kind of listing out the various media that are used. If we just combine the two museums, there's this plethora of ways in which can communicate about water. And one thing which really struck me, Farah, when I was looking at your presentation was the water collected from different rivers, 50 plus rivers, you said, and which is stored in jars. And it was such a moving picture for me, coming from a biochemistry background myself. I wanted to ask that, so what, was this a community-driven exercise, and how, because it is not easy in my experience to also involve community into these activities. So how has the museum gone about, and if we take the collection of those samples and also maintenance, because they have to stay over years, how do you go about it? And you could use that example or any other example that you like.
The water from the nearby, so the idea was that it's transboundary rivers, because we have rivers all around us. So because we wanted to talk about what is the problem with this sharing, the river sharing and the so when you make it too technical, it's difficult. So some of the water was collected by the community or by communities living near the Tista water. We asked the community from there. Then some of us traveled, so we had friends coming. We had participants coming from Nepal. They brought the Nepal water. I went with my colleagues to Myanmar, so we brought that. And of course, we had to put some chemicals in it to preserve. But there's only 57 samples, 57 bottles, and it's a very small museum. I mean, I'm so proud of it, but then the reality is it's a two-storied space, but however, we are very proud that we could have those 57 rivers, the names of it, the stories behind it. Yeah. So there are pictures, there are photographs, there's videos mentioning that. And the woman, one of the things that I insisted is have a woman as a curator from the community, not someone expert with understanding of museums. If you were going to ask me to be a curator, I would run away, So, but here, happily imposing this on a community woman. But she's a young person. She's, willing to take challenges, and she said, okay, I'll do this. And slowly we helped to look at, support her. And then also we were looking at how to provide her with courses. And I'm still looking for online courses because it's difficult for her to move around. So maybe we can have some online courses where we can, but she has done, hands-on training and learning from there. And the children also, we want to spread this. We really want to take this. So it seems like some of the visitors got influenced, and another community has built a water museum in Tetulia, further north. So that was very encouraging, because talking to the government, we got the whip of the parliament, the speakers, they're from that area. Then it became this, okay, we'll have to go and talk to land ministry for land. We'll have to go and talk to the cultural ministry for the, the rigmarole, the whole routine of this. So we're saying, okay, we'll pursue that. But in the meantime, we'll keep working with the community and participation, because there's a museum, there's curiosity. They'll come, they watch, they learn. Then you can buy a mug. You can get a T-shirt and you take it, and the students pay minimal. In fact, students are always on concession or free. but other visitors, because it's not a money-making endeavor, and we are still supporting. So you might say that it's not sustainable and ActionAid is supporting. Well, I want to go on supporting as long as we have resources, and then we'll think about sustainability and so on. Everything can't be put into that rigid model of, you have to have long-term planning, you have to have funding, and you have to make it sustainable. It has to come from within, and it has to be part of the community. If the community abandons it, that's a different thing. So far, since 2014, they have loved it, they've looked after it, and they're going with it.
Thank you. Very inspiring talking to both of you. Mansee, we can open it to the audience.
Thank you, Chhavi, for engaging both the speakers, Sara and Farah, with your questions. And I think that's the very idea, to empower the youth to talk on a platform as equal with speakers, and also learn how to do these kind of engagements on difficult subjects. So thanks, Chhavi, for this. We will now take some questions from the participants. I know we are running late, but this is how it happens when the subject gets very interesting. We get very engaged. Very rightly put by Farah, that in the long run, if people get engaged, they will anyway take care of it. I may now invite Joy and Raghu, one of you, to really pick up the question of classroom, because I know you are also trying to work on this Puducherry's one school, one pond. So maybe you can see some kind of resonance with the way we are. Farah has also conducted, by the way, a mega water studio in Ahmedabad University, which she didn't talk here. But then museum becomes a center point for water education. And I think that's where Farah and Sara and we also converge in this aspect, that museum is not a place where you go and entertain yourself. It's a place where actually education will start, and you can start talking about it, enlightening each other. So Raghu, are you there? Or Joy, would you like to take the question for Pondicherry?
I think Raghu asked another question.
Yes, he asked question on transboundary, and I saw you have already answered that. So he has asked a question earlier on classroom, water classroom.
Right.
So Raghu,
what we're doing on the water classrooms right now builds off the Ahmedabad Foundation studio on water.
Yeah. So Joy, would you be asking, or you can unmute and ask?
So maybe put your question around the water museum, because we are already having the discussion on it.
Right. No, I think it's a very interesting concept, both what Farah and Sara, they have discussed. And I think it's definitely worth taking up by almost all the states, because I think you have some, and it's very interesting to learn also. See, because we were more interested in the what one school, one pond, or what we call it as OSOP program. And I think with Mansee, we had already had a discussion in the last session, I think, maybe 2 months back.
We had in October, huh? We had on October 13th, to be precise.
So yeah, so we run, we run as part of this, we run a program called water literacy, something like water classrooms, I think. So I think Chhavi also has mentioned, I think, the same concept, but we are taking point.
Your voice is breaking.
Systems. Or maybe we have a network issue, I think. Am I audible?
You are audible, but I think the main words are missing. Huh? You are audible.
Okay. So we are doing a program called water literacy, basically water classroom sessions with as many schools as possible, and as part of the water festival that is happening now, which took off from the Jal Jeevan mission. I think the entire discussion that we had earlier with the local administration department, but we are now going ahead with the program, not only with the schools, but also with communities. I think this year our focus has been mostly on communities, because I think as the water literacy is more of a, it's applicable to communities as well, because I think whether it is school children or adults or children, their illiteracy about or non-literacy about water is evident from the way water is being treated at every level. So they, I think, are being encroached upon, are being turned into sewage systems. I think the issue is everywhere is the same issue. So we are addressing this issue from multiple angles. One, at the school level, we go more of a project-based learning approach or an experiential learning approach where children will do water audits at school. They will do recycling of water for creating kitchen gardens, nutrition kitchen gardens. We install rooftop water harvesting systems in schools and try to teach the children like how much water you can harvest, provided your roof area is so much and if this is your annual rainfall. And I think compared to what Rajasthan or other states, I think we have ample rainfall. This year we had 3,000 millimeter rainfall. So we are trying to tell exactly like how much water we have and how we are wasting the entire thing, and still end up depending on deep bore wells, which are becoming more and more saline. And no, it's an irreversible situation that Pondicherry is jumping into, because more bore wells, more funding, also international funding is being drawn towards it as loans, which we need to repay. So I think it's a vicious cycle of going after groundwater, neglecting your own very rich surface water systems, which has been there for more than 2000 years. So it's very interesting. Like, we would like to learn more from the water classrooms, I think, which we were talking about. But we are already doing a lot of stuff in the schools in terms of all aspects of water, from the cultural angle to the science of it, mathematics of a ponds. Like when we talk a pond, we look at the pond ecosystem, we look at, so we have had a huge campaign on water testing now. We are doing a water quality mapping of the entire water bodies that exist in the Puducherry district. So, and this is being done by youth and volunteers, all kinds of people whom we can access to. So we give them training, and we have the water kits already from Development Alternatives. We have sourced it already, and this is an ongoing, it's a movement actually. What we do is not a project, but it's a people's movement. We are still trying to make it into a huge movement. So I think I'll limit the discussion with that, but I think I would like to learn about the water classrooms, especially how they are mapped to the curriculum, and know how to make it practical. How do you take it across the classrooms in a more systematic way, so that they get accepted by the education department as well. So I think we are more keen to learn those things as well.
Maybe before Sara and Farah take up the question, I would like to bring the focus back on museum, because water classroom discussion really requires an independent discussion by itself. First thing. So thank you, Raghu, for the question. But from your question, maybe I add a question to let Sara and Farah take the question. That because these water classrooms are already happening, we really don't have a mother classroom, which is where I actually see the potential of museums. You know, from where and who is going to impart those education for water? Can there be a knowledge bank?
Mansee, one thing is that since you have a repository of a lot of case studies thing, I think such kind of water curriculum can be also part of the Living Water Museum. This is what I thought. And yes, also, I think Living Water Museums is also a fantastic idea, where we can also look at how farmers or how water users across the country are resolving their conflicts. Because see, this can be very encouraging for other people.
So you're talking about the content of the museum. Yeah, content
so I think the scope of Living Water Museum goes much beyond the actual museum. This is what I think.
See, both have equal importance. It's not that this is
correct.
Because physical water museum people will interact, but when you're talking about the Puducherry classrooms which are running, we have to see how it can fit in with the whole idea of water museum. So I will just leave it to Farah and Sara and take the question, and we will have to wrap up also later on, and maybe one more question.
I'm also looking to learn about the water classrooms, and but basically I think none of our curriculums have emphasized on water. If you in South Asia, the curriculums are so boring.
Today I
and
gave a
remains
lecture on
there,
water
and it's not
education.
linked with our life. So, you know, and the curriculum boards and all, they're like, God, this trying to move the Himalayas. So anyway, I think we can take these concepts. And I'm also interested to learn about, because our water museum is giving a non-curricular based information and
Learning.
education opportunity. But how do we bring it into the mainstream and institutionalize it? So over to you, Sarah.
Yeah, before Sara speaks, just to let all the Wednesdays for Water participants and both the speakers know, we had 3 sessions on water education in high school and in university. Because it is not happening, there are only few universities, and Thomas had joined from IISER to talk about how water education is going to take further. So water classroom is a very interesting topic. You give us idea, we are going to take it further, again discuss. We had already discussed, some of the YouTubes are available on these discussions. Okay. But maybe Sarah, you can converge this conversation to
I'll just try and be brief, Mansee, because there's a lot over here. I mean, and Chhavi really should be speaking about the water classroom project, but it's a new initiative in that it just kicked off 2 or 3 months ago, and Chhavi and her team of students are kind of mapping what already exists in the curriculum and what are the gaps that we need to address. And as I mentioned already in the chat box, most of those gaps will be around the issues of culture, water, gender, people. You know, there's a lot of that is being taught from a physical and natural science lens on water, but not enough from the societal and human lens on water. So that is something we're doing. The Foundation Studio in Ahmedabad University was launched in 2019 as a mandatory requirement for all new undergraduates joining the university. So these are young people, 17, 18-year-olds who are joining to do engineering and computer sciences and economics and, you know, you name it. And we make them go through 4 one-month-long studios on water, on climate change, on democracy and justice, and on neighborhoods. And each studio has certain critical outcomes, which are again intersecting around civilizations, law, material thing. I mean, it's a big thing. Each studio was developed over 1.5 years by a team of interdisciplinary faculty, including economists, social scientists, biologists, data people, political scientists, etc. We were 12 people, so very, very intensive process. And the water studio, the way it was structured for these first-year students, in 4 modules, I'll just give you, and that's what we're actually using, Chhavi and I, to work on the water classroom concept, developing the pedagogy for that. So basically beginning with me, myself, and water. So health issues, how much water the body needs, drinks, how good is your water, etc. From the self to shared waters. So water, justice, community, equity, gender, all of that comes into that module. The third one is about systems. So where does my water come from? How is it managed? Who looks after it, etc. And the fourth module is on sustainability. So some of the bigger challenges around water, climate change, food and nutrition security, disasters, etc. So the self, shared water, systems, and sustainability. That's the kind of approach that we're taking. And I mean, I'm not taking anything away from anyone because this was my idea for the Foundation Studio. And now we're just adapting it and using it for developing the water classrooms for middle schools. And we will, as a global network of water museums, there's a lot of work happening on education. And I think we have a repository that is on Google Drive. There are initiatives in America, I think it's called Project WET. So there are many, many very interesting educational initiatives around water. And I would encourage people to, get in touch with us by email, and then we will help connect you to some of these things. And definitely once we have developed our content, curriculum, activities, etc., we'll be happy to share them and have them tested and adapted. So there is also the Pani Pahar curriculum, Chhavi, you can put that into the chat box. The Pani Pahar came out of a research project at Cambridge University and was developed with NGOs in Nepal and northern India, the Uttarakhand region, obviously Pani and Pahar. Very good curriculum. It's available online. Anyone can download it. It's done for junior, middle, and senior schools in England. But you can adapt it, you can contextualize it, you can use images and photographs and stories from your own region. But I think it was a massive piece of work and it's worth people using it. So I'd stop there.
Thank you, Sara. I see some other questions also in the chat box, but to respect time, we are already running late. We will have to.
I have to leave in 1 minute. I'm sorry, Mansee.
And end to the conversation here. And I would like to thank Sarah Ahmad, Farah Kabir, and Chhavi Mathur to be our guest speakers today. And it was a wonderful discussion. Key takeaway is that the world is already now talking about a virtual water museum and a physical water museum. Important to learn here is that we are really trying to find out ways to bring an integrated knowledge about water, because there is abundance of knowledge. It's just that we need some place, virtual and physical both, and it will be nice to have a convergence of it, which I think Sarah is also talking a lot about it. Classroom is kind of, the children of those museums. This is how I will see it, and, wrap up the conversation today. Do join us next time, next Wednesday, 16th of March. We have the part 2 of Women in Water, and we talk about water justice. And we really take this to the ground, and we see how women leaders are born out of necessity. We already saw an example from the Water Museum, which Farah was talking about. And we have 2 laureates already sitting with us who are also examples of women in water. And this is what we are celebrating. Do keep joining us. We really thank you for bringing us so far. We are inching towards a year of Wednesdays for Water. And we are already lining up speakers for June, let me tell you that. So we are really, really excited to have this going, and appreciations and acknowledgements are very much, well taken by us, and we are taking it very seriously as a free water education from our end, and we are trying to get as many good people as we can. Thank you so much. We look forward to having you on next Wednesday and Wednesdays to come. Do keep joining us. I thank again all the speakers and all the participants who have been joining us here time and again. Please take care of yourself. We get in touch very soon, and keep following our social media. Thank you so much. Namaskar.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chhavi.
It's a pleasure.
Sorry.
Thank you, presenters, for joining us today and enlightening us with your wisdom. Also, thank you all the participants for joining us and making the session interactive. Besides walking and talking water, worries and wisdoms collectively, we see this as a platform to cross-connect and expand our network and explore possible collaborations. We are also making notes to publish both scientific and non-scientific work. Here is a glimpse of some of our writings. You may reach us through email, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and also look at our website www.w4w.in. We look forward to your suggestions and comments to make the series more meaningful and engaging. And meanwhile, we hope that you appreciate today's session. We represent Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Hyderabad, Terry School of Advanced Studies, New Delhi, Environmental Design Consultants, Ahmedabad, FluxGen Sustainable Technologies, Bangalore, Counterview, and we are supported by Wiki's Water Resources Council. We truly appreciate your support and encouragement in conducting this series, and we hope that you will stay tuned with us through our social media platforms and our website, and you will write to us at our email IDs.